we've had close to 200 registrants for this webinar. So obviously this topic is a very hot topic in the Philippines and globally, to be honest. So thank you for making the time to connect with me. Ling, how about we go into the next slide, please, and we'll just jump in to our agenda. So before we get into it, let me introduce our team with you that's going to be presenting today. You have Ling McDermott, uh, who's one of our enterprise CSMs, Josephine Enriquez Ping, or otherwise known as Ping, is also another one of our CSMs, myself, Isaiah Alamani or Sai, another CSM, and Ruth Thornton, our lovely product manager, who will be sharing a lot about what's going on in the world of outcomes as well. And a bunch of other instructor people who are also helping out in the chat. We've got Colt, one of our solutions engineers, and Adora as well has joined us today, another one of our CSMs. So we and Eric as well is now a part. So we got solutions engineers who help out with configuring and helping to demo products as well. Product manager like Ruth, who will tell you what's going on in the world of product at Instructure, and us as CSMs. Our role is to make sure that you get the outcomes and the experience that you're after. So even after this webinar, don't be a stranger. We love to connect with you and to make sure that we are helping you get the outcomes that you want to achieve and make sure that you have the best experience possible. So with that being said, let's kick on right into it. Shall we? Let's go to the next slide, please. Let's go to the agenda. So we're going to give you a quick introduction on outcomes-based education. We'll tell you about some case studies and how some other institutions are using outcomes. From there, we'll look at an outcomes overview and best practice, do a little bit of a demo there. And then we'll look at the Learning Mastery Gradebook roadmap and enhancements. And then very quickly touch on how can you take your outcomes-based education to the next level? What are the next steps from here? How can you enhance your experience with Canvas and with other things that Instructure has to offer as well? And then we'll have some time for Q&A. So with that all being said, I'll pass it over to Ling to kick us off today.
I think we still have the rules of engagement.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the rules. So again, this is content heavy. Use the Q&A. Sorry that the chat is not working, but anything you want at all, put it in the Q&A. Our team here at Instructure will be reading all of the questions and highlighting the ones that we need to address at the Q&A portion of the webinar. And if you are an admin, like I said, connect with us. We love to know what your use cases are. How can we help you achieve your strategy and push your institution forward as well? And we will be uploading this. So I know that's the most common question, uploading this recording and the presentation to the community page afterwards as well. Cool.
All right. So we'll start with an intro to OBE, outcomes-based education. And with that, we are sending out a poll. We'll give it about 30 seconds to answer. Interesting answers. We've got mostly no experience whatsoever. All right. Okay, I'll be ending in a bit. Give it a couple more seconds. We'll end there. Looks like we've got mostly no experience whatsoever. And teachers are expected to align content with outcomes in Canvas. Yes, that's true. Because the Philippines is required to do OBE. All right, share the results. All right. Okay. So thank you for answering that poll, and we will move on. So outcomes-based education was mandated by CHED in 2012. I think most of you know this, and we've been working on and working with OBE in the Philippines for over 10 years now. But when we start to talk about OBE, and if we were to ask every single person in this webinar what your definition is, we're most likely going to get a unique answer for every single institution. And we all have a general idea of that we are measuring students' progress and mastery against competencies. And there is a wide variety of what this is going to look like at every single institution. So what we're trying to do here in Structure and Canvas with OBE is to keep it as flexible as possible so that no matter what your definition or your program is going to look like, Canvas is going to be flexible enough to work with your vision. So we've developed here a golden path for OBE with Canvas outcomes. This is primarily just everything that you can do to set up an OBE program using the Canvas tools that are already available to you. As you can see, there are quite a few different steps here, and we kind of call this a journey from setting up your competencies and defining your competencies all the way through assessing performance for the learner and allowing them a chance to review their performance as well as additional attempts, maybe multiple attempts, to be able to prove their mastery of specific outcomes. So while OB is a very, very large and complicated big picture, we're going to emphasize the importance of defining outcomes, which is really the base of any OBE program that you want to use within Canvas. So like I said, we're going to focus on Canvas outcomes because that is the foundation. And I know that many of the schools already have their outcomes laid out. So, but we all know that in order to have a successful OBE program, you really need to start with the outcomes that you are going to be measuring students' progress against. So with Canvas outcomes, you can link your institutional outcomes to both programs at a sub-account level, as well as individual courses, individual assignments, quizzes, and things like that. And once you have that framework, you can tie them to the actual activities and assessments that are available within a Canvas course. And another great thing with Canvas outcomes is that the data is going to be automatically compiled at every level once you've set everything up. So you'll be able to automatically collect the data and be able to see student results, compare results, and things like that. So we're going to dive into more detail about this, and Ping is going to show how to make the outcomes and connect them, align them with your assessments. So, but before we do that, I wanted to show a couple of case studies of how institutions have been using Canvas outcomes. So the first institution is an education program, and they're using outcomes for internship evaluations for student teachers in their final year who have to go and intern at different schools. So one of their outcomes is student teacher must demonstrate knowledge of execution of differentiated activities within a classroom setting. And what they've chosen for mastery levels is exceeding mastery, mastery, approaching mastery, and needs improvement and not applicable. So you can set custom mastery levels, and we will show how to do that in a bit. And they just need to show students who have gotten mastery, but they also want to show students that are going above and beyond, and that's why they have exceeding mastery in these outcomes as well. So the evaluating teacher uses a rubric to evaluate that student teacher during a visit to the internship site. And they use a decaying average as 50-50 for calculating mastery. We'll explain what decaying average is, but it's basically a formula to determine proficiency based on students' average scores, giving more weight to the most recent scored. So this is a great example because they are also using it to tie it back to education as well as working towards that mastery grading system. So they're really teaching these student teachers what mastery grading looks like, and then but also using it to evaluate them. So that's the first institution. The next one is a technical school using outcomes. So this one is an arborist electrician school. An arborist is like a landscaper. And so they go out in the field and actually have their students have to show that they can climb a tree and that they can tie knots. And it's been difficult for their instructors because typically they'll go out with their clipboards and mark their students if they're doing it correctly. But now they have these outcomes and they're able to go out and they're able to see their students perform these different competencies. So like the first outcome is students must demonstrate how to tie, dress, and set a top line hitch. And they have no idea what those knots are, but they go out in the field, go on the Canvas app and identify whether the students are mastering the skills or not. And the other competency is climbing. And like students have to climb trees and the teachers would say if students mastered this or not. And students have to show this 2 times. So they chose the method of n number of times. And once students are proficient twice, they have mastered that skill and are able to move on to the next set of skills. So they only chose 2 grading scales, either proficient or not proficient. So they only really had 1 point or 0 points. And they set that 1 point as mastery, but it is just a unique way to use this and a great way for them to go back into their records to check if students are completing and what they're doing inside Canvas. And students also have immediate access to these data points, and students get to see whether they've mastered those skills or not, and they can keep track of their own learning in these types of courses. So those are the 2 case studies we have, and I hope this gives you an idea of how to use outcomes, Canvas outcomes. So I move on to Ping, who will show how to set up outcomes in Canvas.
Thanks, Ling. All right. So based on the poll, we had a decent number of you that are fairly new to outcomes. So we do want to kind of introduce the concept and show you how you might utilize this. So from user groups and conversations with you, we often get questions around how do we track progress, like be it for accreditation, or how can we pull data to prove that our students are learning the concepts that you're teaching. So outcomes would allow you to do exactly that. Outcomes will allow you to track learning standards and competencies. And once enabled, it allows your administration and faculty to really see your students' progress. So, which are measured by pedagogical goals or your desired outcomes. This is also great for compiling data on student progress, and you can also correlate your outcomes to grade and student work that will automatically compile this data for you. We also just wanted to give you a quick tip that if you are using blueprint courses or course templates in Canvas, this is an easy way for you to distribute your outcomes to the courses where you want them to be utilized. And of course, it will save your faculty a ton of work. And if you're, for example, like experiencing like any resistance from your faculty, or you're just wanting to give them a solid foundation to start from, we highly recommend considering how you might want to distribute that information, whether it's creating the structure for them at the account level and allowing them to pull it into their courses, or you'll be the one to distribute them by utilizing a blueprint or course template in Canvas. All right, next slide. Moving on to the next step, when we are thinking about outcomes is how, of course, we would set this up in Canvas and how you might import outcomes into Canvas. Back to the other side, sorry. So as a general best practice, we really like to see outcomes set up at the root account level. This is considered best practice because it then allows you to be able to pull out those imported into a sub-account or into a course. Otherwise, like if outcomes are created at the sub-account or a course level, you wouldn't be able to pull them higher. So in that case, like for example, you created the outcomes in a course and then you want them to you want to use them at the account, you would have to go back and recreate them. So that's why we cannot stress this enough, that it's best practice to set up your outcome structure at the root account level and then you pull it down. I also do want to call out that outcomes that are created at the course level are not reportable except via the Learning Mastery Gradebook within the course. So once again, if you have reporting needs, then you want to be able to track across all of the courses. That's why it's best practice to set those up in the root account level. So that way, when you're pulling out reports on all courses and outcomes, rather than going like course by course and having to export them using the Learning Mastery Gradebook, you can just pull them in one go. All right. One feedback as well that we heard during the user group is that you've experienced like some challenges into creating outcomes because it could be like a bit tedious and manual using the user interface. So as an alternative, you can absolutely import outcomes in bulk. You can build it out using a CSV and then import those into Canvas to create many of them at once, rather than having to build this one by one. But a couple of call outs with using CSV to bulk import is that your file must be formatted correctly according to the outcomes import format documentation that I've added in the presentation. So I'll be sending a copy of this presentation to you, then you can access the format documentation in there. There's also a sample CSV that you can download, the second bullet point there, and then you can edit from there. You wouldn't have to start from scratch. It's already formatted in the right way. So yeah, there's also a link in there into how to import course outcomes for an account. It lays out the step-by-step guide into how to do that. So we encourage you to check those guides out as well. All right, next slide. Okay, so I do want to cover a few admin considerations when we're thinking about outcomes and setting them up. So as for the benefits that I discussed on the previous slide, you'll have to add outcomes into the account level. Another thing is that it will allow you to pull reports to monitor various program success, which I think is very helpful. You can also track accreditation data by setting up your outcomes at the account level. And if you don't want any of your outcomes to be modified, you can creating them at the account level will help you ensure consistency. Now, many of you, as you're going through and starting to play with outcomes, you're going to think about how you might utilize these in your Canvas instead. So you'll most likely do some testing. So just some considerations that we want to talk about related to testing is that once outcomes have been used to assess students, like even if they're test students, you wouldn't be able to delete these outcomes. And then another testing consideration is that we would like to recommend for you to create an archive folder as one of your outcome groups, because over time, the outcomes that you're tracking against will be updated over time, and eventually they will be outdated outcomes. So just to keep everything kind of clean and organized, it's helpful to think through making an archive folder for outdated outcomes, just as kind of a general best practice. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So when we're looking at organizing outcomes, you can see in the screenshot here, is what I call like a file structure. So this is essentially how outcomes are organized in your account, and you're able to create different groups within your overall outcome structure, and then have specific outcomes that live kind of like in each group or each folder. Some institutions, like when building this out, they try to mirror their sub-account structure. And as you're looking through this, it's general best practice to think about having a clear naming convention to organize your outcomes. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, you can go in and create an archive folder. You can name it any name that you want, like outdated outcomes or old outcomes or archive. So if you have like outdated outcomes that come in, you can move it into there, and then it will make sure that your old data points do not mess up your reports. Okay, next slide. Okay, so another consideration when we're thinking about outcomes is to consider what your options are. So in terms of the first one that you'll have to think about is your criterion ratings. So what you're looking at now in this slide is the proficiency rating. So that's the default that we have in Canvas, which is the exceeds expectation, meets expectations, does not meet expectation. But these fields are editable. You can change this if you want to, and you can also modify the points. So as you can see right here in the red plus sign, you can come in and add additional criteria and ratings. So you can try out different criteria and ratings as you see fit, depending on what makes sense for you, or if you have specific standards for, like, for example, you have like an accrediting board, you can add this as well in your criteria and ratings. So this was touched on by Ling a little bit in terms of setting your calculation method. So in Canvas, we have 5 different options into your calculation method. So it's also like a most commonly asked questions around outcomes as to which calculation method you should be using. And the answer greatly depends on how you're planning to utilize outcomes in your institution. So I'm going to quickly walk you through these options and provide some examples on how they're calculated. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first one is the decaying average. So it takes the most recent result as 65% of the mastery weight, and then the average of all other results count as 35% of the weight. So, but the 65-35 percentage, you can edit that as well. This is a great option if you want all assessments to count, but do not want like early poor performance to make it challenging for students to achieve mastery. So like, for example, in the Philippine setup as well, like, for example, you have like a final exam or like a summative assessment that you want to give like higher weight, you can use decaying average. Next calculation method is the n number of times. So it requires students to achieve mastery at least the number of times set by the institution. So in this example, it's 5 number of times. And the scores above the mastery will be averaged to get the final score. So this is a great option if you want students to meet a particular baseline while also tracking their progress to reach the particular mastery level. Okay, next calculation method. So we have, okay, so the other 3 are fairly straightforward. Like, for example, most recent score. So it will take the most recent graded assignment or quiz as their score for mastery. So this allows students to show skills or a demonstration for where they're at their current learning process. So for example, there, the item scores are 1, 4, 2, 3. The final score based on the calculation method is 3 because that's the most recent score. Next is the highest score. So it takes the highest score on a graded assessment for mastery. So this is a desirable option if you want students to satisfy requirements needed for proficiency while allowing multiple attempts to track like continued progress. So among the item scores there, we can see that 6 is the highest score. And lastly, the average calculation method. So quite straightforward as well. It calculates the average or the mean of all the scores. So however, as the warning states, this is not a recommended option, as early poor performance can make it challenging for students to achieve mastery, because since it's averaging, it can pull the overall final score for in the calculations. All right, so those are the options that you need to think through when setting up your outcomes. Next, let's talk about using and aligning outcomes. So again, I'm going to repeat it again, like when setting outcomes at the root or sub-account level, you're doing this, by doing this, your instructors can pull these outcomes into their courses to use them. Once again, by doing this, they won't be able to edit the outcomes, which will ensure consistency. So in this screenshot in the right, you can see that this is how like a teacher could find and then import an outcome into their course. So all they have to do is like click the find button. So it's a pretty simple process. They'll use the button and they will find the outcomes that they're looking for. They can find the folder and then choose to import the outcomes, and then they can continue to utilize this or align an outcome in a course or rubric. In the bottom, you can see that you can align an outcome that lives in your course to a rubric. So the key call out here is that to align an outcome to a rubric, that outcome must already be in your course. So you can see over here that we have an example of what items have been aligned within a course. And we have some guides here that's going to walk you through exactly like step by step on how you can align the outcomes to a rubric with a question bank or with an assessment in a new quiz. So it varies depending on those. And then there are a lot of ways that you can align your outcomes to best track your data. So we encourage you to dig into these guides. They have like videos in there and very clear examples as well as screenshots that you can follow along. All right. So next, okay, before I move to rubrics, just want to ask the rest of my team if I've missed anything or if they have anything else to add. Siling.
I think we're good.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to rubrics. Okay, so we often see that many of our customers want to assess outcomes using rubrics, so we're going to cover that. Next slide. There are a lot of good reasons why we do this. So we see that rubrics help assess whether mastery has been achieved and also provide really clear and consistent feedback for your students. It also makes it easier for your instructors to grade and just keep the consistency across everything. So this is a best practice that absolutely can be utilized. Rubrics, just like outcomes, it can be created at the root account or sub-account level. And then similarly, the instructors are able to find those rubrics and use them. They can also, like the teachers can also go into their own course and create their own rubric. So if they have created their own rubrics, outcomes that have been shared from the root account level can be correlated or aligned into their own rubrics. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so there. Just to kind of continue discussing assessing outcomes and rubrics, we do want to point out a couple of different things here. So outcomes and rubrics can contribute to the overall score, but we do not need to inform the score at all. So it will be entirely up to you whether or not you would like your outcome to tie in into the actual assignment or other assignment grades. So if you do want to include the outcomes as part of the score, you can see that there's a like tiny box there, like the use this criterion for scoring. So when you are assessing outcomes from rubrics, you have the ability to use this criterion for scoring. If you do that, it will correlate the outcome with the grade. If you do not, then the mastery of the outcome is only apparent in the Learning Mastery Gradebook, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. But if not, it would not impact the student's grade. Okay, so I'll just kind of double down on what you saw in that previous slide. Outcomes can be aligned in other places within Canvas. So it can be aligned to question banks, classic quizzes, and individual questions within new quizzes. So we encourage you to think about how would you want to align your outcomes, or how you might want to utilize them alongside rubrics, and then start testing them out. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is also a question that we get a lot, because the key reason that you're likely wanting to use outcomes is to be able to track student success, to be able to demonstrate that you are meeting institutional standards or accreditation standards. So we have 3 account and sub-accounts level reports that can be pulled at both levels that are very useful. Next slide, Ling. So this is only for admins. So we have 3 reports in the reports tab that you can export. So you have outcome export report that will show you all learning outcomes and accounts, and also includes details of all the attributes associated with each outcome. We also have the outcome results, which will show you learning outcome results for each of your students. So if you like to just pull information in terms of where are they at, who should we be paying attention to, or our students demonstrating mastery, who's at risk, what do we need to focus on, that outcome results report is very, very helpful. We also have another report in the same tab. It's called Student Competency Report. So it shows that the learning outcome results for all students, but it also includes the associated assignments. So you can see the screenshot in the right, the student competency. So this is useful because it will show you where they are doing really well and where they need additional assistance. So when you are trying to identify okay, my class seems to be doing really well, but there is some data that I want to dig in a little bit more of the student competency. So this is a report that you go and check. Okay, so there are other reports around outcomes that I'll show you. You can also look into the individual student. So this can be accessed using the student user profile, and then you click the outcomes reporting. Another report, next please. This one, outcomes reportings in new quizzes. So you can see there, in the first row, for example, there are 5 students that reached mastery, and then Taylor Swift is one of those students. So that's the outcomes reporting in new quizzes. Next. Okay, so this is the Learning Mastery Gradebook. This is what it looks like. And there's also an export report feature available, wherein you can pull out this information. Okay, next. All right, so those are the reports that you can get around outcomes. I'm just gonna quickly introduce this feature option because this is not visible for you guys. This is a CSM enabled feature. So next slide, please. Okay, so as I've mentioned, you will not see this feature option in your instance because it has to be enabled by a CSM. The reason for that is that there are some considerations that that goes with it. So if you are looking to have a common mastery scale across the board, you can have this turned on. So this is going to give you the option to just have a single mastery scale that's going to be used across all of the outcomes that's going to be created in your account. So however, this is going to be a bit of a flexibility because you can grant permission to different sub-accounts to be able to change this. However, the caveat there is that once you set this up, this is going to be applied across the board until you go in and modify it at the sub-account level. So If you are thinking about this and want to make your outcome creation process a little bit easier because you want it to be uniform across the board, you can let us know to turn this on as a feature option. And then next slide, when turning on this feature option as well, next slide. Okay, this will also allow you to choose a single calculation method that once you set this up, it's gonna be applied across every single outcomes in your account. So considerations though, if you're thinking about this, this is gonna impact your historical data. So if you're already using outcomes for like several years already or months, this will alter how your data is reported. So it's not going to change the scores that has already been recorded, but it's going to change the scale and the wording if you run those reports. If you're using outcomes already, you might not want to enable this feature option so you can retain all of your data. And then another consideration is that once this feature has been enabled, we definitely do not recommend turning it back off. So if you're going to use this, I highly recommend that you have it enabled in your beta so you can look at it, do some testing, and make sure that your data is okay. And again, you're not going to see this feature option available in your instance because you will need to reach out to a CSM to have this enabled. Yeah, but hopefully, yeah, that gives you a couple of different considerations if you're thinking about using outcomes. Okay, lastly, next, the Learning Mastery Gradebook. Okay, so the Learning Mastery Gradebook shows you a report of how students are performing specifically against the outcomes that have been associated to a course. So as an instructor, you can take a look at students that might need additional intervention, additional assessment opportunities that you can also get to see how your class is performing against an outcome as an average. So basically what it tells you, it's going to give you that actionable data that you can use throughout your teaching. So in order to make sure that all your students are having the opportunity to meet or exceed the mastery. So there are two versions of this. So the screenshot that you're seeing in the screen, so that's the instructor version. So where you're going to see like all of the data for all of the students in your course. And then there's also a student view of this where students are able to see how they're performing against those different outcomes and mastery levels. Yeah, so another thing is that this can be exported via CSV using that export report, as I've mentioned. And for the teachers, like you can switch between the regular gradebook and then switch it back to Learning Mastery Gradebook, depending on the filter that you select. All right, so next. All right, so speaking of Learning Mastery Gradebook, I'm gonna call on Ruth to give us roadmap and product enhancements.
Thanks, Ping. All right.
Thanks,
Hello,
Ruth.
everybody. What was that, sorry? All good? All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's awesome to be able to come in and have a bit of a chat about some of our product focus areas when it comes to outcomes and the Learning Mastery Gradebook and things like that. So thank you for having me for a segment of today. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If I could just get a nod from one of the instructure team. Yep, great. We can see that. Terrific. Alrighty. So wanted to get started. Obviously, anything that we're thinking about when it comes to forward-looking parts of the product. So things that are coming in the future, things that are in design, prototypes that we're working on. These are all forward-looking product enhancements. And so this is an important just caveat before we kind of go into any of those things. Because anything that's on the roadmap, anything that's coming in the future are essentially subject to change. And that's really important because as we connect with different institutions and we get feedback on how we're going and the direction that we're going in and how we're solving different challenges, we need to stay agile to make sure that what we're ultimately releasing is going to be reflective of the best possible outcome for our customers. So please keep in mind that the designs you're going to see in a couple of these initiatives and a prototype that I'm going to be walking you through for the Learning Mastery Gradebook, that those things are subject to change based on feedback, but hopefully they give you a sense of our direction. And today I'm going to be covering off on 3 different initiatives, one focused on how you use outcomes, one on the management of outcomes, and one on the Learning Mastery Gradebook, so how you're actually reviewing progress against those things. So let's dive in. The first initiative that I wanted to share with you is related to our rubric redesign project. So some of you might have heard about that before. If you attended Canvas Connect last year, you would have heard me speak about this a little bit. Hopefully, maybe someone from the instructor team could actually post the blog post from this. We do have a communication in our product blog in the community, which goes through essentially all the items of what we're going to be addressing during that rubric redesign. For that project, we are basically overhauling the entire rubric workflow, which is really, really exciting, all the way from the creation and the building out of rubrics and the interface that's used for that, to how these are then viewed and actually used for marking in the speed grader. And also the introduction of a student self-assessment capability to really hone in on that reflection and engagement in feedback and autonomy as part of that process for learners as well. So we're very excited about that whole initiative. Please do jump in and read about it. But a core piece of that, as you can imagine, is how rubrics are built and the different options for how users go about this. And so one of the quite powerful capabilities that you saw talked about from the team earlier in the presentation is the capability to be able to use or create manual and custom criterion in your rubrics. You can create them based on whatever it is you want that criteria to be. But you can also create criterion that are based on outcomes for your account and your course. So you can be building rubrics that have some standards, educational standards as your criteria, what you're actually going to be assessing them against in the rubric, or you can have custom ones, or you can have a combination of those things. So Canvas already supports that. But in the existing rubrics interface, how it looks today, the only way to add an outcome to a rubric is to actually add it as an individual criterion. So it needs to be the criterion itself. Whatever that outcome is, it actually is the criterion. And while that works for some use cases, there are others that it's not as ideal for. So the purpose of this development that I've got here is that we're actually going to be unlocking with this build, giving you more flexibility in how outcomes are aligned to rubric criterion. And so we're going to be supporting that in 2 different ways. Firstly, we're going to continue to support the existing functionality where you build a criteria leveraging the outcome or the standard itself. And secondly, we'll be introducing the capability to essentially tag a criterion. So you can build it and call it whatever you like, but you'll be able to go ahead and tag an outcome from your account or from your course, which means you'll be able to create those things, and the mapping of the learning and the expertise that's expected from that particular criteria, that's actually mapped directly to your educational standards. So that's what this screenshot is sort of showing, that you'd be able to create a criteria and then you'd be able to pick from your outcome list which one of those things you want to align it to. And so we know that's a really critical part of how you're sort of showcasing and reporting what you're assessing, being able to say, well, here are the rubrics and the items in the rubric rather, and here are the outcomes that I was assessing against those things, which tie back to your curriculum. So at this stage, our sort of targeted intended delivery for this is the second half of this year, as you'll see in that product blog post. So please do check it out for all the capabilities there, but we're really looking forward to making the use of outcomes even more flexible as part of that rubric creation. The second area that I wanted to highlight relates to work that we're doing in making the outcome management experience more robust and more intuitive. And so we know that outcomes or standards, they sort of mean the same thing. Standards, you would use outcomes for Canvas, within Canvas rather, to achieve. But we know that those things change over time, especially if you're creating your outcomes based on central frameworks, which are reviewed or revised on a given cadence. We know that, an outcome that you're assessing someone on in 2015 or 2020 is not going to be the same in 2025. So today, it's actually quite challenging at times in Canvas to determine which outcomes are current versus those which are outdated. And essentially what we're doing here is we are creating the capability for users across an institution to manage outcomes more appropriately and ensure that only accurate alignments are being created by only using the most relevant and updated version of any given outcome. And we're doing this by introducing an archived state. So again, you can see in these screenshots, and these are not necessarily the final design, but hopefully they give you a bit of a sense of what this will look like, that there'll be the capability to actually determine that an outcome is archived. And it means that you'll have much better clarity around what is current and what's been retired. And there won't be the capability for anyone in your account to continue using outcomes that are actually the outdated version of that particular standard. So we're really looking forward to that capability. And I know a lot of people on the call are new to what this looks like and using outcomes in Canvas, but hopefully you can imagine this is going to be quite a powerful update. And the final piece that I wanted to share is regarding the Learning Mastery Gradebook itself. So I'm going to stop sharing in just a moment. I'm actually going to walk you through a bit of a prototype. But as described by the team earlier in the session, the purpose of the Learning Mastery Gradebook is essentially to showcase learner performance against outcomes specifically, as opposed to the regular gradebook or the traditional gradebook, which is showcasing assessment scores, assessment grades holistically. So this is really helping you hone in on just how people are going at that standards or that outcome level. And so what we're looking to solve here is that we know that teachers currently using the Learning Mastery Gradebook are doing so to track student mastery of or performance against particular outcomes within a course. However, there are some limitations that reduce its usefulness and make it not as efficient as it could be for supporting students towards achieving those different standards. And so as we've connected with different institutions around the world and we've gathered lots of feedback from people already using this space in Canvas, we've heard a couple of key needs from them. The first is that they need a way to use it that's more intuitive and more accessible. So the interface itself needs to be updated. And hopefully you can see, at least just from the screenshot, it does look a little bit different to what Ping had shared in her screenshot there. And hopefully it looks a little bit more familiar with the traditional gradebook that you are familiar with already from Canvas. So reducing that cognitive effort and that cognitive load between the two spaces within the grading experience for teachers. The second piece is that we know that they need a way of seeing the contributing scores that are actually making up the overarching outcome mastery performance. So a way to really drill in and go, okay, if this person is competent or whatever it is that your scales are determining, what if you're using that outcome in 3 or 4 different assessment pieces, how have they actually gone in each of those 3 or 4 things? How have we gotten to the outcome result that they are competent or not competent or mastered or not mastered or average or whatever it is? So a way to really drill into that. And finally, that they need more mechanisms to actually take action from the data that's in the Learning Mastery Gradebook, similar to how the traditional gradebook supports that through the Message Students Who functionality, bringing that type of capability into the Learning Mastery Gradebook as well. So it's a very similar interface and workflow that's predictable for our end users. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I'm just
Get into really briefly. And while we get into the slides, if you have any questions, we're going to go into the Q&A in just a minute. So drop your questions into the chat as well. But really quickly, I'll share with you how to move outcomes, how to move your outcomes-based education to the next level. So Link, if you can just share your screen again really quickly. The first thing I'll talk about is credentials. It's another one of our part of the instructor ecosystem. And what credentials is it gives you the ability to issue a badge or a credential after somebody has achieved something. So for example, with the use of outcomes, if somebody has achieved a particular outcome, you can give them a verifiable digital badge that they can use and show to prospective employers, or if they're going to education to more education, going for a master's or PhD, they can show, I've achieved this outcome, or this outcome is related to a pathway of my learning journey as well. So it shows workforce readiness, and it shows progress throughout the educational journey. You can create a learning pathway so that the outcomes input into that pathway. And it shows recognition. And in this day and age, who doesn't like to have something that they've achieved that they can show off to others as well? So that's the one thing that you can do. The other thing is strategic consulting. So we have people who are not only, if you next slide, Link, please, not only who are part of our team, who are experts in pedagogy, in in teaching and learning. So you're not going to be talking to a tech person or a salesperson, but people who actually have experience, real world experience about best practices in learning and pedagogy. So if you want to know more about credentials or strategic consulting, get in touch with us and we can tell you more about that as well. But I'm just going to move on quickly. We've got 3 minutes left, and I want to give time to the Q&A as well. Great. I see Ruth and Ping are already typing out answers into there as well. But uh let's answer some of these. And Ruth, feel free to just jump off, or any of you feel free to jump on off mute and answer the question as well. With outcomes, is it possible to see a single student's performance in a certain program across all courses? Probably a better question for you, Ruth, in terms of like an
No
outcomes
worries.
dashboard.
Happy to jump in there. So it is something that can certainly be reviewed using the reporting. So some of the different report options that that Ping mentioned, I would definitely encourage you to sort of explore those, because that is showcasing outcome data across, you know, a whole account or a whole sub account. And, you know, will then capture details for that user across all of their enrollments. But I think the easier way of kind of understanding this, and a need that we've heard from a number of different institutions, is being able to capture this through admin analytics, because admin analytics is such a powerful tool to be able to understand engagement, performance, progress of a learner across their courses, not just within a single course. And so that is certainly something that we are considering as part of the future roadmap for admin analytics, is the actual integration or bringing in data points for outcomes as well. So no timeline committed for that at the moment. It's something we're considering as part of prioritization, but certainly I think that would be the most meaningful way of addressing that particular need.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ruth. Okay, we have 1 minute left. Any other questions? I'll give you 10 seconds to chuck anything in there if there is anything that comes to mind at the last minute.
Is there no questions? I'll also want to remind everyone that I'll send a copy of the recordings. I'll upload it into community, as well as the copy of the slides. And I'll also send a feedback form to identify if you found this webinar helpful, or if there are other webinars that you'd like us to run in the future. Yes, so that's it from me.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for your
you.
time. I know there's a lot of information. So like I said, we will give you everything that you need. And any feedback or anything else, even not related to outcomes, contact us. We'd love to get in touch with you and know what's going on in your world. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
See everyone. Bye.